can keep my video off in between us all having 2 to 3 load sheddings a day. I'm trying my best to make sure that I remain online for the full meeting. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Deirdre Bartman. I'm chairperson for the Budget Committee. Today we are dealing with the overview by the Auditor General of South Africa on the 2021-2022 audit outcomes of the Public Finance Management Act 1999 for the Western Cape Provincial departments and entities. We will also receive a briefing by the Provincial Treasury on 2021-2022 annual report process pertaining to departments and entities of the Provincial Government of the Western Cape, which will be followed by consideration of minutes and reports and resolutions and actions at the end of the meeting. Colleagues, as you would already know, those who are permanent furniture here at the Budget Committee, this is a statutory meeting, and 90% of what you hear today you probably have heard before. The new matters will be in terms of, obviously, the outcomes of the audit reports for this particular year. So please take that into account when we get to the question and answer session as well. I'm going to ask the members just introduce themselves for the record, and then I'm going to hand over to the two respective departments. I know Minister Wenger is also online with us, and I'm going to then allow her to do first introductory remarks. Also, I just wanted to be noted that the Provincial Treasury are both in the Budget Committee today as well as in the Budget Forum. So we are cognizant that the team is split up between the two meetings as well for us. Thank you so much. Members, if you can please introduce yourselves.
Oh, good morning, Ricardo Mackenzie. I see my camera is on and my mic is off. Ricardo Mackenzie.
Thank you so much.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Khalil Brankes.
Morning, Member Brankes.
Good morning, Chair. Kayla Murray.
Morning.
Good morning, Chairperson. Lula Mvimbi.
Morning.
Morning, Chair. Wendy Kaiser Philanda.
Morning. Thank you so much. I don't see any other members online. Okay. I'll start with Minister and Provincial Treasury for introductions.
Good morning, Chairperson, and good morning to the honourable members of the Budget Committee. It's lovely to be with you here this morning. As the WCPP gears up to interrogate the annual reports and the work done by Western Cape government departments and entities over the last financial year, and as you gear up to review the financials and audit outcomes of the 21-22 financial year, the Provincial Treasury will be briefing you on that annual report process. The team has prepared a presentation on that, as well as annual reports in general, and we'll take guidance from the committee on the latter part of the presentation. I'd also like to welcome the presentation from the Auditor General on the audit outcomes for the Western Cape, and we look forward to engaging with the committee on that. And then finally, we wish this Budget Committee, as well as the Standing Committee and the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, I see the Chairperson is present as well, as you embark on this very crucial cycle of parliamentary oversight. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I just want to check Ms. Cullen from the AG's. For those who don't know, Ms. Cullen is the new Business Unit Manager. Am I getting that title correct? New Business Unit Manager for the AG office in the Western Cape.
Business Unit Leader. Thank
Business
you.
Unit Leader. Apologies. We are
No,
leaders
that's
in the Western Cape, not managers. Wonderful. Thank you. If you can introduce yourself and just your team as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and good morning to the Budget Committee members and the Minister, as well as the department representatives. I'm here joining you today as the Business Unit Leader of the Western Cape. My name is Sangeeta Callan. This is my first round of interactions with the Oversight Committee, so I'm quite excited that we kick off this process. Joining me today is my colleagues, Rian Venter. He's my product champion in the senior manager in a technical office. I've got Ashik Ali as well, one of the senior managers in the business unit, as well as Stepo Mhlomi. He's my acting SLM manager. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Karen, we can jump straight into the first presentation. We're going to do questions and answers afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. Tsepo will be sharing the slides and the presentation. And Chair, I don't know if you would mind, I can keep my camera off, just so that we can all just also deal with the load shedding as well as they're having the videos running for the presentation.
Thank you so much. We must do everything we can in order to help with electricity these days.
Honorable members, we've got the Western Cape Provincial Government's audit outcomes for the Public Finance Management Act cycle for 2021-22 that we are presenting today. We're very excited to be able to present these outcomes and to share these messages and provide oversight with the guidances and the recommendations from this process. Tsepo, you can move on to this next slide. Just a reminder around our reputation promise, our mission around the AGSA has a constitutional mandate, and as the Supreme Audit Institution of South Africa, we exist to strengthen our country's democracy by enabling oversight, accountability, and governance in the public sector. And we do this through our audit and to build public confidence. And our vision is obviously to be recognized as by our stakeholders as the relevant SAI, but again around enhancing public sector accountability. You can move to the next slide, Tsepo. So just before we jump into the outcomes, I just wanted to remind everyone around the messages that we had from the previous cycle, and it was underpinned by us having clean audit outcomes during the 2021 audit cycle. This was achieved through a strong leadership tone around and having robust control environment, a solid and consistent pattern of good financial governance. Committee members would remember that education remained unqualified with findings as a department in the previous year because they had recurring findings around performance information. And outside of education, all auditees had submitted their financial statements on time. Human Settlements was the only department that did have material corrections to their submitted financial statements. However, again, the trend was reflected as encouraging because what it did is it showed the institutionalized controls over the financial statement preparation process, which is so critical. Financial health was reflected upon, and there we said that the budget and expenditure management was very sound and that the provincial government managed to prevent unauthorized expenditure for the past 3 years. And you'll see I will reflect on that as well in the later slides for the current year. Irregular expenditure did see an increase, and this was due to the non-compliance around supply chain management prescripts. Here it was around human settlements, which accounted for majority of the provincial irregular expenditure. We will also delve into some levels of irregular expenditure that we identified in the current cycle as well. And ultimately, there's the maintenance of strong controls in areas of financial and performance reporting of the outcomes that we had in the last year from an overall basis. So that's just a brief reminder of where we were at in terms of the messaging from the last cycle, so that you can have at least some level of a base for the presentation that I'm going to be making for the current cycle. So we can move on. So just briefly, Honorable Chair and members, just the Strategy 2030 is the first cycle. This PFMA cycle is the first cycle in which we actually will be providing the outcomes under our new strategy. So in response to the call to action and with our eyes which are firmly on our mandate, our strategic aspiration is to have a more direct and a stronger and consistent impact on improving the lives of ordinary South Africans by sustainably and efficiently shifting public sector culture through insight, influence, and enforcement. So our success in this regard does not only rest on our ability to fulfill our mandate, it also rests on the extent to which we might mobilize and bring the collective influence of the accountability ecosystem to bear on the audit portfolio. So our aspiration is that stronger and more direct and consistent impact on the South African lives of the South Africans. Theory of change is through shifting public sector culture and behavior, and we're going to be working closely with the accountability ecosystem to do so. Honorable Chair, if you allow me, then I will be going into the audit outcomes for this cycle. So the province has continued to keep and sustain its clean audit outcomes. All departments with clean audits who achieved it in a prior year, including Provincial Parliament, has managed to sustain their clean audit outcomes. And this is definitely reflective of the province maintaining a strong control environment. We urge then the province to continue building and improving on this robust control environment. It's the education and human settlements departments that remained financially unqualified with findings on compliance and performance information. From the perspective of the public entities, of the 7 public entities, 4 sustained clean audit outcomes since the 2020 year. These were the Gambling and Racing Board, Government Motor Transport, Saldanha Bay IDZ, and Cape Nature. The Gambling Board did improve to a clean audit in the 2021 year by addressing findings that related to competitive bids not invited and deviations not justified from 2020, but they managed to sustain their clean audit in the current year. The one that we show that's close to clean is Casidra. It's remained unchanged since last year as an unqualified with findings, but on performance information. However, we believe that clean audit is achievable. The one that is sitting under qualified with findings is Wesgro. It deteriorated from unqualified with findings due to material limitations on property, plant, and equipment. Wesgro had material compliance findings that related to the material misstatements on the financial statements that were submitted. It failed to prevent irregular expenditure, and we had non-compliances around procurement and contract management. Just to talk a little bit about what caused the Wesgro outcome was that action plans that were prepared for the prior year issues that were identified were implemented not in a timeous manner, and that they had no insufficient reviews and inadequate reviews around the corrections that needed to be performed on those action plans. Therefore, you can move on to the next slide. So we can just unpack then the focus areas that brought about these audit outcomes, being the financial statements, the compliance, as well as the performance reporting. So from the financial statements perspective, you'll see that there was 100% timely submission of financial statements by legislated date for all auditees. So we've improved from a 95 to 100%. We've historically had good quality financial statements submitted for audit. I think this trend has continued. Apart from Wesgro submitting financial statements which were materially misstated, everyone else had a good set of financial statements. It is definitely encouraging to see that the province has reached that level of maturity where 95% of the auditees can submit the financial statements that were free from material misstatements, and also do so from year to year. Again, this is the tone that has been set by the accounting officers and accounting authorities that filtered to the various levels, which enables a strong control environment, which is the link to the message that we had in the previous year. The major contributor, we believe, to achieving and sustaining clean audit outcomes is this solid control environment together with the tone. However, it also demonstrates the importance of daily and monthly controls, implementation of action plans to address any weaknesses identified in the system, and that is not only weaknesses identified through audit, but through these robust review processes, and then ultimately holding people accountable. Wesgro then again, as mentioned, had financial statements that had material misstatements specifically linked to the useful lives of property, plant, and equipment. There was inadequate review thereof, and also that that these were not in compliance with accounting standard around property, plant, and equipment. As a result, certain assets were still in use despite being reaching their zero carrying values or even approaching zero carrying values. Tsepo, you can move on to the next one. Just to briefly touch on financial health status. So when we evaluate the financial health specifically for departments, we do adjust certain financial statement items with the disclosure notes. So the amounts move from a modified cash amount to closer to an accrual accounting amount. So we can then see whether these financial indicators to some extent are close to what the norm is. This is also to assist in identifying potential risk areas that are pertaining to financial health. So in the of concern category, we've got 6 departments, which is education, environmental affairs, premier, social development, transport and public works, and local government. And in the entities is Casidra and Atlantis Special Economic Zone. Now, when we say concerning, the assessment is primarily due to unfavorable indicators that relate to the accrual adjusted deficits, meaning expenditure exceeding revenue and current liabilities exceeding current assets. However, the overall financial health of the province is still considered to be good, as there was no unauthorized expenditure in this past 3 years. Although we had fruitless and wasteful expenditure and it's increased in the 3-year period, it does still remain relatively low, and it amounts to 538,000, which was, if you compared it to the previous year, of 903,000. These were primarily due to isolated breakdowns in controls and penalties and interest. And I think it's overall, it's important that these areas be closed, the gap be closed during those yearly control reviews. So overall, there is a favorable picture for the province, and this is due to the good financial management practices that we've reflected upon in terms of the controls. If I could then move on to the next focus area being compliance. We do see that non-compliance remains relatively low. Over the past 3 years, it has somewhat remained at an acceptable level, and again reflective around the control environments that are more preventative in nature rather than detective. And this is specifically around those robust controls that we found where aspects are in fact picked up before a non-compliance occurs. So if I can just delve into the areas, there was improvement in the financial statement submission rate with all auditors submitting on time, where we had the one late submission in the previous year. It's improved and we do not see any late submissions in the current year. Then we had, as I mentioned, the compliance findings around education, human settlement, and Westgrow. And specifically under education, it was around strategic planning and performance management. Around human settlements, it was failing to prevent irregular expenditure from reoccurring, including transfer and conditional grants that were transferred to a municipality without National Treasury approval as required by the DORA Act. And then Westgrow was the material misstatements that were submitted, that were identified on the submitted financial statements, specifically around the one I mentioned for PPE. There was also asset management around disposals of equipment, computer equipment, consequence management not done with regards to irregular expenditure that was identified. There were some procurement findings around supplies tax matters, as well as a bid adjudication committee not being properly composed, and then ultimately failing to prevent irregular expenditure from reoccurring. If I can just unpack then supply chain management briefly. So the picture does look positive. If you can see that from the prior year with no findings has improved to the current year. What we show here is also those where we had compliance, supply chain management findings, specifically with regards to being reported not only in the auditor's report, but in the management report, which is the blue block. Westgrow then is the only auditee with compliance findings on procurement, which affected the auditor's report. And I've managed to mention some of those that appeared in the auditor's report. The ones that were in the management report was around uncompetitive procurement practices, doing business with suppliers without tax clearance, and then the local content issue. So although these findings did not escalate to the auditor's report, auditors are encouraged to address these findings and implement appropriate corrective action, as these issues can easily become material, causing a regression in audit outcomes. Honourable Chair, if I can then move on to the irregular expenditure. While audit outcomes paints a positive picture, it's still concerning that we do have irregular expenditure that's occurred and is the same as the previous year, amounting to 330 million. The irregular expenditure stems mainly from procurement and contract management findings. And in the case of human settlements, it was non-compliance with the housing code, resulting in incorrect payments to beneficiaries. Of the total irregular expenditure of 330 million, the auditors had picked up 47%, and then our audit office picked up 53% of that 330 million. A big portion that was picked up by the AGSA was about 166 million at human settlements, and it related mainly to the tender requirements of 2 contracts that were above 30 million that did not include a condition for mandatory subcontracting, or functionality criteria not stipulated or differed from that stipulated in the original bid invitation, which was incorrectly disclosed as irregular expenditure under assessment. However, it needed to be placed into the main note due to an interpretation difference around the applicability of the 2017 Provincial procurement regulations. Auditors are definitely encouraged to investigate or required to investigate irregular expenditure and recover where possible, or if recovery is not possible, it should be written off. And again, appropriate disciplinary steps must also be taken. At Westcrow, we found that they had not done an investigation as required, and material non-compliance related to consequence management was reported in the auditor's report. If I could then move on to performance reporting. So over the past 3 years, there has been a slight improvement in the quality.
Chairperson Ricardo, okay. Can you just repeat that last sentence? I don't want to make that I misheard. I do apologize for that. If you could just repeat that again.
Okay, so I was saying, yeah. No worries. So I was saying that at Westcrow, there was investigations were not done, and as was not done as required. And there was material non-compliance that related to consequence management, which you'll find sitting in the auditor's report.
Thank you. Member Mackenzie, can we go to the current and next slide?
That's perfect. Thank you, Chair. I wanted to make sure I didn't miss it.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you. So under performance reporting, there has been a slight improvement in quality of performance reporting that was submitted for audit. You can see the increase there. There is, however, still concern with a number of auditees' performance that requires material adjustments. 14 auditees, which is about 67%, did submit their performance reports that required no material adjustment. But this means that we've got 33% of the auditees that had to rely on the audit process to identify misstatements. The 7 were community safety, cultural affairs and sport, and Cape Nature. These 3 actually did manage to adjust and make the corrections so they would get a better audit outcome under performance reporting. And then those that could not was education, human settlements, Casidra and Westcrow. It is now key to note that in these 7 auditees, right, in order to retain that clean status, they had to make that adjustment as mentioned. The findings then related to around achievements being reported that were not reliable. So again, the underlying supporting evidence did not support the achievement. And then we also had instances where performance indicators and targets were not useful. So for example, source information for measuring the planned indicator was not clearly defined, and the related systems and processes were actually not adequate to enable consistent measurement and reliable reporting of performance against the predetermined indicator definitions. Another instance we had planned indicator was actually not specific in clearly identifying the nature as well as the required level of performance. And instances we had where source information and the method of calculation for the achieving of the planned indicator was also not clearly defined. It's important to note that we continued in the current year. We did not have any instances where there was no underlying records or there were no planning documents. Education has been struggling in this area since their regression to unqualified with findings in 2018-2019. And among the key challenges is that reported achievements is not actually supported by the appropriate evidence. Certain indicators are actually not well defined, which makes it quite difficult to gather sufficient evidence, to some extent resulting in a limitation. And if you remember, I mentioned Casidra in the slide earlier to say they're close to clean, is an example where an auditee has been struggling under performance information reporting for a number of years. So that is the focus area of performance reporting, and holistically the outcomes and delving into the detail of the outcomes of the 3 focus areas. Honourable Chair, if you'd allow me to just then touch on the material irregularities, and it's just this one last slide. So in the Western Cape, we had one confirmed MI for Department of Human Settlements. The material irregularity related to awarding of FLISP subsidies, which is the Finance Linked Individual Subsidy Program. And this was to invalid beneficiaries, or the amount that was awarded was actually incorrect. We issued this MI in November 2021. Just a little bit about the FLISP subsidies. This is a housing subsidy that are awarded to qualifying beneficiaries. So in the case of human settlements, there were instances where these subsidies were actually paid to beneficiaries that did not meet the criteria to receive such subsidies, or amounts were actually higher than what the beneficiary qualified for. And this is where it resulted in a non-compliance and a financial loss for the department and resulted in an MI. So in response to this MI that we had issued, the accounting officer submitted representations in relation to improving the controls, also recovering the losses, as well as disciplinary process considerations, which we then evaluated. We concluded that appropriate action was taken to address the MI. Specifically around the prevention of the financial loss, the department did update the controls and calculated the amounts payable to beneficiaries correctly as required by the Housing Code from December 2021. So that's the month after we issued the MI. There was disciplinary step consideration. So during that period of time, the department found that this practice was going as far back as 2012. And with the high staff turnover and the lack of written instructions from any superior, so person holding a higher position within the department on this type of practice, they could not identify specific officials or any specific official that would be held responsible. The loss recovery considerations, so a bit of background around the indication was that given the context whereby a decision was taken in consultation with the National Department of Human Settlements to exclude allowances and commissions in the calculations, no steps will be taken to actually recover the losses. Now, a little bit of background around how these subsidies were paid. So the subsidy is actually not paid to the beneficiary, but to the financial institution or a third party. So the banks use the approved subsidy amount as offset against the beneficiary's mortgage costs, which has a benefit to the end user to make their bond repayment affordable. And the accounting officer and the department did an analysis and identified that to recover the cost, it would not be viable for the department in relation to the financial loss. We evaluated this as an audit office, and we accepted the fact that the appropriate steps were taken in the areas. A sufficient investigation was done as well, and ultimately then indicated the MI to be resolved in the auditor's report. Honourable Chair and Budget Committee members, that would be our presentation from the Auditor General of South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask the Provincial Treasury also does their presentation. That way we can do the question and answer session on both presentations. Thank you. Ms. Kantana?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. We do have a short presentation, which Aziz Hardin is going to take us through. So the first 12 slides will deal with the differences and the changes in terms of what was issued by the National Treasury. And as you've rightfully said in the introductory remarks, this is a presentation we do annually. And so some of the members would be quite familiar with the content, but if guided by the committee, we can then also go through what we have added as an annexure to the first 12 slides, which will then go into the detail of the annual report. But Chair, with that, let me hand over to Aziz, who's going to take us through the presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Gantana. Good morning to the honourable members and to everybody on the platform. So annually, National Treasury issues a guideline to all the departments and the public entities in the country in the preparation of the financial statements. The guideline ensures that everybody presents the information consistently, accurately, and that all of the significant matters is raised in the annual report, so that when it comes to oversight committee, they can see that whether it be financial information, performance information, or the compliance with laws and regulations, it is adequately covered in the annual report. If we move over to the next slide, and Melissa van Niekerk will be driving the slides for us. So Chair and members, you have heard that the Western Cape has stood their ground in terms of a solid foundation for good financial governance. But we have been having the conversations with the Auditor General in terms of how do we now move from unlocking the value that good governance gives us and setting up an agenda where we not just speak to the conformance or the compliance agenda, but we actually move to performance. You will find that with all of the auditors that have achieved these consistent audit outcomes, it means that from a financial management perspective, we are at a level 3. That means that we are complying with all the laws and regulations, the significant laws and regulations, and that we are doing what is required of us. However, we understand that in order to be able to serve every single citizen, we have to add some more impetus to the performance agenda. So we are, as Provincial Treasury, together with the departments and together with our stakeholders, we are setting an agenda alongside of the Auditor General to move from ultimately measuring what we're currently measuring to what the citizen is experiencing of the services of the Western Cape government. So you will see that with sound corporate governance, it will always start with our people, our processes, and our systems or our tools that we make available. And this is gradually we are changing it up so that we can change the behavior, that not just that we comply with the laws and regulations, but that we do this not just consistently, but we always seek to improve, not just on the audit outcomes, but on the service delivery mandate that has been given to the government. It means that we do deal with change behavior at the very top, and as the Auditor General has reported, that it is the tone at the top that sets the bar for the delivery of these good outcomes. We also deal with innovation, and that is always looking at how we can do things better and what it is that we can bring new into the system that will ensure that we are always at the head of the curve. And then when it comes to our supply chain criteria, we are always pushing for the 3 E's, which is economy, efficiency, and effectiveness of spend. And as has been reported by the Auditor General, more than 95% of our clients have achieved this. There is still some work to be done, but that is adequately being covered by our supply chain unit within the Provincial Treasury. If we're moving on to the next slide, essentially, as I indicated, that National Treasury provides this guideline for all of the national and the provincial departments, and then they issue a guideline for our Schedule 3A, our public entities, our national public entities, as well as our provincial public entities. The annual report does highlight the significant achievements, the performance information, the governance within a department or an entity, and it also, especially within the departments, it gives the oversight committee as well as those that are reviewing the annual report information about how human resources has been managed. And then lastly, in section E of your annual report, you will always find the financial information. Also, the performance information, which we will find under Part B, it gives an indication of the actual achievements that the departments and the entities have set themselves out when they were establishing both the strategic plan, the annual performance plan, and as well as implementing the estimates of the provincial revenue and expenditure, as well as the adjustments estimates. The publishing of the financial and non-financial information, obviously, it promotes the accountability and the transparency. And as indicated by the Auditor General, this has been consistently applied within the Western Cape. And it also then further enhances and improves the trust and the confidence that the users of the financial statements has when they do see a good set of audit outcomes, because the audit really is an audit done by the Auditor General. It ensures that the information that is not just in the annual report, it ensures that whatever information is coupled with the annual report, the Auditor General reviews it to make sure that there is no contradiction based on what has been audited in the financial statements. They review the rest of the annual report to make sure that the information is not inconsistent with what they had audited. So there is some level of assurance that the Oversight Committee gets when they do see an annual report with the Auditor General's report inside of it. If we move on to the next slide, so the members would know that at the start of any government, there is a strategic plan that is set out for 5 years, which is annually updated for changes in circumstances, and then the departments prepares annually an APP, which is the annual performance plan. And this then is underpinned, or it is overlaid on the medium-term budget as well as the individual performance plans, and this is monitored on a monthly basis through the departments, feeding back to Provincial Treasury on not just their spend but also on the non-financial information. And we also monitor this on a quarterly basis in terms of the quarterly performance reporting that is managed by the Department of the Premier, and then ultimately feeds back to the Presidency's office at National Treasury. So the APP, together with the budgets, together with the annual financial statements, this is an annual process. It culminates in the annual reports, and it then gives the accounting officer any indication of if there needs to be minor tweaks going forward into the next performance year, but also depending on the available budgets that's tabled in the new MTRF for the next cycle again. If we move on to the next slide, as indicated by Ms. Jinda Gantana, there were absolutely no significant changes in the annual report. So for those members that have worked with the annual report last year, understand that if you had gone through that process very rigorously last year, there would not be any significant changes. National Treasury has allowed the departments, based on the pandemic and based on targets that could not be implemented because of the pandemic, there was an opportunity for departments to retable their annual performance plan. All they had to do was to present it in the annual report if there had been a change in the APP, and this would also have been subjected then coming through the normal parliamentary processes, as well as being audited by the Auditor General to ensure that all the laws and regulations pertaining to changes in the APP has been followed. And we can conclude, or we can indicate that where departments had changed their targets or indicators, that they had done so correctly through the correct processes of taking it through Parliament and then having it subjected to the audit process. If we move on to the next slide. So for those new to the process, the annual report guideline, which is available, it all it does is it ensures that every department in the country follows a particular formula in setting up the annual report. The annual report is made up of 5 parts for the departments, and then for the public entities, it's not as specific to say part A, part B, and part C or D, but it does have all the relevant sections that is required by the committee to essentially carry out the oversight functions. So the general information in the annual report will normally tell the committee about the organogram, who are the senior leadership within a department, the particular laws and regulations that pertains to that department, any information that is basically standard information to be able to understand the environment with which a department or an entity operates in. So when you pick up a set of when you pick up an annual report, you will quickly identify that each of the annual reports follows exactly the same process in terms of the information being made available. If we move on to the next slide. So the part B of the annual report, which is also a very important section, really speaks to the non-financial information. It speaks to the performance information, and this is normally preceded by an Auditor General report on the performance information. You would have heard Ms. Cullen speak about the usefulness and the reliability of the performance information, and this is normally where you'd find it. The department sets themselves a target or sets themselves indicators. These indicators are discussed at Budget Committee, and then the annual performance plans are signed, and then this is the basis from which the departments and the entities spend their money to be able to deliver on those targets. So part B is very important for the Oversight Committee in terms of looking at the non-financial information in terms of what the departments and the entities has actually delivered for the year. When the committee looks at part C of governance, essentially, these are the various committees that supports the accounting officer or the accounting authorities in terms of carrying out their functions. In this section, the oversight would be able to find a letter or a report from the audit committee. There would be sections about the internal audit in terms of what any internal audit assignments has been implemented or undergone within a department or entity. There's also information about the enterprise risk management processes, and it gives the committee a view of what is still considered to be a significant risk and how that department or that entity has addressed or mitigated the risk. And then there's also information about any fraudulent activities, and there will be a report on whether or not any of the departments or the entities have had any issues in relation to fraud. When the department looks at the annual report in terms of part D, you will find a lot of information regarding how human resources has been managed. So it will speak about the filling of senior management posts. It will talk about any disciplinary action. It will talk about vacancies. It will talk about anything that is related to managing the people within the department or the entity. This is normally an important here to understand if the department had utilized consultants, reasons for why those consultants had been used, and this you'd normally find in a department or entity where there had been high vacancy rates. There's also additional commentary in terms of training costs, in terms of employment, and as I said before, vacancies and any reasons for why the staff could be leaving a department. So this is really about understanding there have been people that has been employed in a department or in an entity that is responsible for producing both the financial results as well as the performance indicators, and it gives the oversight the oversight committee an appreciation for what it takes to be able to produce the outstanding results that has been presented this morning. And then the last part of the annual report, this is the financial statements. The financial statements, excuse me, when the financial statements has the audit report with it that indicates the audit outcome, it gives the committee the assurance that whatever the department presents and the audit outcome is good, that the Auditor General has attested or has checked the assets, the liabilities, the revenue, and the expenditure. And when the audit outcome is unqualified, it sets the basis for appreciating that whatever you are having oversight over, it has the stamp of approval of the Auditor General. You can comfortably rely on the fact that the financial statements have been prepared using the correct accounting standards, and the Auditor General has applied the international audit standards to these financial statements. And where a department or entity is unqualified, it tells you that the expenditure, the revenue, the assets, and the liabilities have been appropriately disclosed. Money has gone where the department indicates that the money has gone, and there is nothing that is significant that needs to be brought to the attention. You'd also find that the Auditor General confirms that they do not test 100% of the transactions, but the audit standards does require them to test the transactions on a basis that will ensure that the financial statements fairly present what is in the financial statements, that the financial statements, all the transactions is fairly presented. It means that you are able to derive the opinion that when this is audited, that your financial statements is a true and accurate reflection of all the transactions and events that has occurred. When we move on to the next slide, just some guidelines for the Oversight Committee. It is really a time where you have to evaluate all the information that is included in the annual report, and the process is normally you take the annual report from Part A through to Part E, and it is the committee's responsibility at that time, after having evaluated the annual report, to ask the relevant questions of the departments and entities, so that those insightful questions can give you the comfort that the department and the entities have delivered and has responded to what they have indicated in their annual performance plan. It is also a time where the Oversight Committee will reflect on the performance of the department and the entity against what was indicated to be their significant indicators and the targets that they have achieved, or the targets that they have achieved for the performance here under review. The committee will also then evaluate the financial statements for every department and entity and ask those questions that are relevant in terms of should you have any understanding requirement in terms of any of the revenue, the expenditure, the assets, or the liabilities. The comfort that the Auditor General gives you is that already you have the comfort that the transactions has been accurately reflected, and if you had any further questions, that would be asked directly of the department and the entity, and that is just to improve your understanding of the management of the entity. It is also the committee's responsibility to, at that stage, when they do look at the departments, is to evaluate the audit reports and the key messages that the Auditor General is giving through the audit reports, and then also consider if there's any significant scope of resolutions that you may be wanting to put to the department. The committee also has the responsibility where anything is unclear. The committee has the responsibility of requesting any additional information from the department that could enhance your understanding of the department and the entity's performance, as well as their financial information. At the end of the public accounting process, the committee will, as per normal, produce a set of resolutions, and this then becomes a starting point for the new financial year for the departments and entities to ensure that they address any of the concerns that the Oversight Committee has. When it comes to the second last slide, moving on. Essentially, in terms of the way forward, as I indicated in the beginning, that we are continuing to drive not just the culture of compliance, good governance, but we are really impressing on the departments and the entities to really up the game when it comes to performance. And yeah, I'm not talking about performance information, I'm talking about the overall performance, so that ultimately the recipients of the services of government actually feels that they are receiving the services that the government has been mandated to deliver on. We are continually focusing on an integrated approach. And essentially this requires us not just to work with the CFOs and the accounting officers of the departments and the entities. We work with our partners at National Treasury. We work with the Auditor General. We work with everybody that can assist in driving the good financial governance agenda. This also requires us to continuously go back to our business processes to ensure that when we deliver services, it is done in the most effective and efficient way within the corridors of what the law allows. The Provincial Treasury with the departments through their various budget committees, the various MTech engagements, we continuously looking at strengthening and providing a budget that is responsive. So there is significant amount of work that goes both into the planning and the budgeting so that we do get maximum value for the money that is entrusted to us. We also continue to drive appointments that ensures that we only appoint people that is fit for purpose. And this requires us to look for experienced and competent departmental and public entity officials. And this further drives the talent management implementation to ensure that because we are living in the fourth industrial revolution, that we fill vacancies with not just those that comply with law, that meets the criteria in terms of understanding laws and regulations, but that they also have this looking forward and looking at the innovation in terms of implementing what is required to move the government forward. Our continued focus remains to be on systems and data enablement, because when we have data enablement, we are able to, when we understand the data, we are able to look at the story that the data is able to tell us, and we are able to make better decisions with the data that is at hand. It allows us to project into the future. It allows us to unpack what were any of the mistakes that we had made, and then it allows us to correct and then to future plan for a improved service delivery. Then also indicated high on the agenda with discussions with the Department of the Premier and the Auditor General. We are consistently looking at the combined assurance, and that is to ensure that processes are not duplicated throughout government and our service providers. So we are rolling out with the Auditor General combined assurance that supports each other's function, and that it will ensure that the departments and entities covers the basics of what needs to be covered, and that they pay they do not extend themselves in terms of paying unnecessarily for duplicated services. So driving the combined assurance is it's a significant focus between the Auditor General's office, the Provincial Treasury, and each of the departments, and that we continue to drive through our media engagements and our SEGRO initiative that we've started when the Auditor General went onto the clean audit agenda. And then lastly, we consistently and continuously looking at the legislative interpretation and the implementation challenges, and this requires a significant amount of work between the Provincial Treasury, between the National Treasury, and then at times pulling in the Auditor General to ensure that we are all speaking from the same page in terms of our understanding of the laws and regulations, as well as how specifically the Western Cape government has implemented. You will also see that the Provincial Treasury, when we were delegated the authority to deal with irregular expenditure, this province has consistently managed the irregular expenditure, and through our irregular expenditure committee, we have also ensured that the departments and the entities have implemented the laws that it requires consequence management. When the irregular expenditure committee looks at the expenditure, we do ensure that each of the departments and entities have implemented the appropriate or the necessary consequence management, because it just sends the signal that this government is always about doing the right thing and doing it in the way that the departments and entities has been guided by. So committee members, that is just an overall view of the annual report process that would cover your agenda for the next month. As Ms. Cantana has indicated, there are slides extending up to slide 40, but that's really just for additional reading for the committee members should they require any additional understanding of the various sections of the annual report. The additional slides is just there for the committee members should they need it to reflect on if they have missed anything. This is the detail that can be obtained within the annual report. So thank you, Chair. That's the presentation this morning from the Provincial Treasury.
Thank you so much to the respective presenters. And Mr. Hardin, I'm sure that the members, given that this will be their 4th annual report season, are very comfortable with reading their respective annual report books. You do not come this far in life just to read presentation slides and instructions for members. I'm sure they'll be fine. Members, we are opening up the question and answer session now. I'll take the first 3 hands. Member Mackenzie. Okay, Member Mackenzie's hand is the only one up, so you can go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I guess there's no limit to the questions I can ask, seeing there's my hand and stuff. Thank you for the presentations. Yeah, load shedding. I came to the office to avoid load shedding. Chairperson, I'm going to go to the auditor's presentation, and I'm going to start on slide number 12 and slide number 13. And I just wanted to get an understanding. If we look at human settlements, one is the 221 million, education 58.6, and community safety 26 million. Sorry, page 12, I see in my notes. And if you look at the 2021, 2022, 2020, 2021, 2019, 2020, the total amount was 330. I'm just giving a bit of background so I help my understanding as well. 2020, 2021, 328, and 2019, 2022, 87. I just want to get from the auditor, and I'm not sure if this the person is in here that audited those departments. I doubt it. Is that the same sections involved over 3 financial years, because the amount is pretty similar over 3 years, or is it completely different sections? And then I want to get, because we actually received a presentation on FLUS in Bredasdorp last week on an oversight visit. And one of your comments to me was concerning that obviously was given to you. And I wrote here that you said no one could be held accountable. I don't, because there was no supervisor in place. Again, I didn't want to interrupt you. If you can just clear that statement up for me, because 5.9 million was obviously transferred over, or the subsidy was made available to a bank, I think, or third parties. Surely somebody had to sign that off up to, I presume, HOD level for that to take place. So I'm really trying to understand why you're saying no one could be held accountable. And then on page 12 under education, you talked about there was no underlying documents. That is, I presume, for the 58 million. Again, I didn't want to interrupt you. If you could just clear that up again. Did the department saying there was no documents to audit that particular section? Was it misplaced? Because in my mind, there should have been documents available for them to make that decision. So I'm just really want to make sure that I do understand what you're saying correctly. And then under Wescrow, under the non-compliance, again, it comes to the issue that you said related to no accountability. If I did hear that, I think that's the point where I stop you just to hear that correctly. Was it no accountability on the, I really need to understand. We will obviously ask them as well when we get to that relevant departments in the next few days or so, but I'm just really trying to understand what went wrong that there could be no accountability there. Oh yes, page 13, I see on my note, you said that no specific individual could be held accountable. I'm really struggling to understand that. And then under ComSafe on the 26 million, I think, If you can just give a bit more, like I said, we will get to the department. I'm just trying to get from the auditor's perspective, from your what went wrong, what did you find, what couldn't you find, and that couldn't fix. And then the last question on this, Chair, is it the same units involved over the last 3 years? I think that was my first question as well. Or is it completely different units? Because I know in human settlements, previous years, you also had something there. Or in your finding, was it completely different section? Was it this department, program 1, and the next financial year's program 6? I'm just trying to get an understanding if the stock measures was fixed in the previous financial years. And then to the Auditor General, I'm sorry, to Treasury, and perhaps to the Auditor General as well. The Casidra issue that we dealt with many years ago when I was in scope, and I know the court made a finding around it. Has that been completely resolved in the restatement of financial statement? Is it something that we have to deal with in the future, or is it completely sorted out and all the financial statements has been done to reflect the Casidra Department of Agricultural matter? Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you so much. Member Mvimbi.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Can you hear me?
I can, thank you. Please continue.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. At the risk of sounding to be repeating Honorable Mackenzie's questions, I'll therefore confine myself only to 2, maybe 3 questions, and just also welcome and thank the Auditor General as well as the Treasury for the report. It's very comprehensive, and I think it actually prepares us very well in dealing with the annual reports that we'll be dealing with, as well as the Auditor General report. So therefore, my question will just be general and not necessarily specific. Firstly, around the issue of I've noted that the Auditor General indicated that around the submission of financial statement, we seem to have achieved 100% compliance in terms of time there, which I think is actually very good. We're complying very well. But I think also then, if I may link my question of compliance with the presentation that was just made by the Provincial Treasury, that we seem to be doing very well on compliance. Maybe it can be a question I can pose to both, just a general question to both the Treasury as well as the Auditor General. At what stage are we now ready to really begin to go to performance audit? We are doing very well on compliance. Are we ready, and at what stage, as maybe the Treasury as well as the Auditor General, think that are we going to be ready for performance audit? Now, just also on the issue of material irregularity, based on the presentation by the Auditor General, there seems to have been only one department where they have kind of identified some material irregularity, that is a human settlement. Doesn't also think that in view of the negative report from Wesco, audit report from Wesco, didn't the Auditor General also identify some material irregularity within Wesco, or as in Wesco, just a question of compliance? And I see also in that identification of material irregularity, haven't the Auditor General also reached a stage where they could have issued certificate of debts, both in Wesco as well as in human settlement? I think, Chairperson, I'm going to just end there for now.
Thank you so much. Member Murray.
Thank you, Chair. Mine was similar to the members as well. I just wanted to get more details on Wesco's auditing status and why it is that they have declined. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me see here, Ms. Cullen and your team. So basically the members just want some more information on the 3 respective departments. I think 4th one was ComSafe. I know that the AG has answered on performance auditing previously in the beginning of this year, but if you can just maybe assist us in that as well, obviously. Thank you so much. And then I want to add mine as well. Mine is more a general one. I wanted to find out, given that we are going to go into the respective departmental votes in the annual reports as well as the Scopus sessions, if you could just indicate to us the top 2 things that, in your view, that in terms of the annual reports that we are doing well as a province that we need to continue, but also the top 2 things that we really need to focus on. Because from a budget committee perspective, what we also try and do is identify trends across departments where it's not just necessarily one department or another, but perhaps it's a policy or legislation that we need to look at to ensure that we tighten up some of the loopholes or tighten up some of the consequence management across the province. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Honourable Chairperson and Honourable Members. I'm going to attempt to answer some of these questions, and I think maybe just the one around just more information on an CASIDRA issue, as well as the MI information, I will hand over to my colleagues Ashik and Rian to just assist. Chairperson, it's correct. We will be then going to the individual hearings that are going to be happening over the next couple of weeks with detailed briefings per portfolio, so that that type of detail can be delved into. But nonetheless, the questions are very well welcomed. I think the one around, was it slide 11? I assumed it was a slide around, was it not the irregular expenditure? And around the fact that we've got perhaps the continuation of findings within the human settlement space as well as the education space. I just wanted to quickly go to my notes around those aspects. So what we saw was that it did come through in terms of procurement and contract management, and for human settlements, it was specifically under the FLIS space. But what it also had was, there was some areas around tender requirements for 2 contracts which had that mandatory subcontracting, and also the functionality criteria not specifically stipulating as such. I think there was some around buyer specifications that were prepared that didn't allow certain potential suppliers to participate, and then payments to suppliers were irregular, which was irregular, but because their work had commenced, they had commenced without a valid contract. And I think it is some of the areas that we were picking up from the previous year, so there is somewhat a continuation in that space. I'm going to park the MI one for now so that we can then just speak holistically around the concepts around MI. For the education question around performance reporting, I think I mentioned that we didn't have issues around underlying or planning documents, but for education specifically, it was around the source information that is used to basically measure the planned indicator. That wasn't clearly defined. So for example, you would have that the what we would find as underlying supporting information would not match what was defined in the planning documents by education, which related to that indicator and the target. What it does is it doesn't allow us then to confirm the reporting that ought to have been there. So you would end up reporting on something else and not necessarily what was supposed to be reported. And I think it was specifically around users with textbooks, accessibility of textbook versus actually physically having a textbook in their hand. Around Westgrow, my comment, and if I could maybe just answer the 2 honourable members at the same time around just unpacking a little bit on Westgrow. So I made a comment, and I think Honourable Mackenzie stopped me when I was talking about the consequence management. So that aspect that came through on the auditor's report was specifically around us identifying that adequate consequence management was not taken where irregular expenditure was identified, and we elevated that. And I think that is clearly an important area that needs to be taken up with the entity to determine what had failed. But from our analysis, when we were identifying the potential internal control deficiencies, what we elevated and found that there if you remember, the matters were identified in the past. The entity had an opportunity to clear those matters through developing an action plan. And we found that an action plan was developed, but it wasn't implemented timeously. An understanding of what needed to be done was in fact there, but then what was actually done was not adequately reviewed, which required them to identify and quantify the error that was that occurred, estimate useful lives of assets, and then ultimately do the year-end reporting. So this is what we found, specifically for the findings that related to procurement and contract management and the irregular expenditure for Westgrow as well. We saw that they didn't implement preventative controls. And I think it's a very important concept of the differentiation between detective controls versus preventative controls. You would have a detective control in the environment, and you'd actually go and pick up a non-compliance after it happens. Whereas the power of preventative controls allows your systems to be set up such that you pick up a flag of potential non-compliance before that non-compliance actually happens. Then we found a bit of instability in terms of leadership for the financial year at the various levels, and this somewhat filtered through around closing the loop on consequence management. So obviously, it's quite important around oversight responsibility as well as leadership responsibility to ensure that adequate consequence management is taking place. No? So that's what, to some extent, is what we found at Westgrow. So I think I've covered that one there. I think there was one question about what couldn't we find. I don't know whether that was specifically comm safety, Honorable Chair. I might have not understood that question properly, but maybe we could just get a bit of clarity around that. Again, around human settlements, I think I did cover that a bit around what really caused the failures in terms of human settlements. But if I could maybe just delve on the root causes and maybe to a certain extent the recommendations, right? So there was action plans that were implemented in the previous year when it came to the irregular expenditure based on the findings. And this plan did not actually assist to remediate some of the areas, and this was specifically around the tax non-compliance status, which we had an issue that we identified in the prior year as compared to the current year. And what recommendation we left with the department was to ensure that they just be a bit more robust around the compliance, tax compliance status monitoring from their side. So it is an enhancement. So the tax compliance monitoring happened, but it didn't happen at the right point in time. The other bit was around there was a conditional grant that was transferred to a municipality, but they didn't obtain the necessary National Treasury approval. This was an interpretation issue. That's what resulted in non-compliance. And I think it was quite important that we bring Provincial Treasury and National Treasury into this understanding and the closeness with which the human settlement stays with them. No? I see the comment says that it was comm safety and it was the same matters. Honorable Chair, I'll have to come back to you on that one around the comm safety and whether it was the same matters as the previous period. No? Just noting, yes, Member Mvimbi mentioned 100% compliance of financial statements and at what stage would we be looking at performance audit. I think maybe here's an opportunity for me to just utilize the platform to talk about the culture shift strategy that the Auditor General of South Africa is embarking on. I touched on that around the public sector behavior, but the detail underneath that, not specifically touching on performance audit, but understanding what an impact is of a department and entity and linkages to its mandate and meeting the needs of what its mandate requires it to do. Ultimately connecting the dots. So I think we've embarked on a process where we want to connect the dots that we do when we audit the financial statements, which is the expenses at most in terms of the money that's spent by the entities and the departments, moving that into the next space where we now connect that back to the performance reporting. And we all know that that bit is very key in the public sector, where one really sees whether the targets and the indicators are matched to what the mandate is of that entity, together with the need that sits on the ground, and then linkage that to obviously the processes and the systems that are in the environment. And I think this is where we want to say that ultimately is that mandate being fulfilled. So not spot on like if we were to theoretically talk about performance auditing, but ultimately to ensure that that value is gained through the money that is in fact spent and the need is met on the ground of the South African citizen. And I think I touched on that one here. Chairperson, I'll allow maybe Rian to just touch on the MI a little bit, and then we can maybe just then I'll close that, and then Ashik can maybe just do a bit of the feedback on Kasidra, because I think he was close to it. And then Honorable Chair, I will then answer your question. Rian?
Good morning, everyone. If I can maybe also respond to the com safety one. So basically, the way the irregular expenditure reporting works with the prevention paragraph is we look at whether the same non-compliance happened in the prior year and in the current year. So for com safety, there was no such reporting, and it was actually a new non-compliance. And I think if we look at human settlements, of the 221, about 700,000 related to the same non-compliance. So you'll find that prevention of irregular paragraph in the report. If I can move on to the MI. So basically, I think to start with, the MI process is really a legal process. And when the legal people look at it, they will look at it from the point of view of what actions can be taken that will be or that will be successful if it is challenged in a court. So in this case, the non-compliance actually relates back to around about 2012. And the decisions that were taken at that time, the persons that took those decisions, they were not there anymore. So it became part of almost like the policy of how to do it. And that's the reason why there was conclusion that nobody can be held accountable, because all the people that basically set the policy up, and also the fact that the national department was involved also in the decision, it made it difficult to hold people accountable. Because the principle is also that when persons do not work at the department anymore, there's no actions that can be taken against them. I think that's the one part. And then on the last part, it was again a case of whether it would be practical to get the money back. And the other side of it is also, it's not one large amount. So it's many smaller amounts, which you will have to individually try and recover. And then the cost of recovery would not make it feasible to take the process forward. So also the way we look at it, we take the response from the department, we put it in a consultation, and we take it up with our legal department also, and that's how we basically then come to resolve the MI.
Thanks, Rian. Ashik, you can maybe just help with Kasidra.
Thanks, Sangeeta, and good morning to all our members. Thanks for having us again. Just with regard to Kasidra, yes, the matter has been resolved with regard to the court case. And after the court case for agriculture, we did go through a technical consultation process to then say, is there any changes to the financial statements that we would need for Kasidra? So there's just one change that you would notice in the annual report. So previously, We didn't have the transfer funding that came through for project funding into the statement of financial performance. So now we actually have it as part of the statement of financial performance, and you'll see there that we have it as 183 million rand in for revenue, and then 183 million rand as expenditure in the statement of financial performance, and that also covers. So at least we have a flow now, and we have the transfer payment coming from agriculture and showing the project funding in the statement of financial performance considered as well. So that was the only change, and that seems to have resolved the last accounting matters that we do have for the court case, and we are at the point where we can actually close that out now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashik. So through you, Chair, maybe if I can answer the one around Westgrow. So yes, we did identify non-compliances at Westgrow, and we've elevated it in terms of the auditor's report. But now its linkages to a potential MI. It does need to meet the MI definition, which requires it to be indicative of a non-compliance in the environment, a failure of the compliance processes, as well as a potential or a likely financial loss. And we do, as part of the audit process, see whether all non-compliances, and our starting point is generally fruitless and wasteful expenditure, and to a greater extent also irregular expenditure, and to see whether it in fact shows you that financial loss. So I think that analysis didn't bring about a MI in that space. I also wanted to also mention that if one has to land up in terms of a certificate of debt, we must have issued an MI to the accounting officer and accounting authority, giving them an opportunity to then respond. And generally the recommendations when it comes to an MI would be to say, please determine and investigate the extent of this non-compliance that has resulted in a financial loss. Please quantify the financial loss, and perhaps also look to recover it, as well as to stop the potential of actually having further financial losses in the future. And that would be then the implementation of a control. So where we are financial loss, the non-compliance, especially the financial statement qualification, stems from an accounting treatment and around PPE. And I think when it comes to the others, it needs to be an indication. So sometimes when you do get irregular expenditure, you would gain service from that process, but it would have been a non-compliance that has come about in the environment. Chairperson, Honourable Chair, if I can maybe just cover the two messages or top two things that you would want to focus on. Just from my side, the message that we had given in the previous cycle, and we show the continuation of that messaging around good financial governance practices, but good control environment. The one message is specifically related to procurement and contract management, and for continuous review processes across the board when it comes to potentially new areas, but also where there is quite a lot of spend happening, specifically around specialized spend, that it's good to have clear oversight around the processes, the robustness of the reviews, to ensure that you do not have non-compliance in that area. My second message would definitely be around performance information for that oversight, to just make certain that the targets and the indicators and their definitions, their processes to gather information, all of that is supported adequately from beginning to end in terms of the environment. If there are changes that we see in the middle of a financial year, that those are also diligently documented and set. So if you have a change in a system, that the change in system be defined, and that the supporting information for that change in system is defined, and then it's cascaded down to all of those that are actually gathering that information. So that would be my two messages. It would be very important that that is being kept close to oversight and leadership's eyes. Thank you, Honourable Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Cantana.
Thank you, Chair. I think I have been covered by the AG, both in terms of the CACEDRA response. I think there were 2 questions, and then also by the performance audit issues, but to align ourselves with Ms. Callan's response in terms of Member Mavimbi's question. And I think when we look at the presentation, specifically slide 1, for the province, specifically in terms of a renewed focus on service delivery and what that would require. I think we have been fairly good at laying the foundation and getting closer and closer to and maintaining a good outcomes as far as compliance is concerned. The next step would be to focus with renewed energy in terms of improved service delivery. There's a number of initiatives that's currently underway, and that also speak to the Vision 2030 that the AG has touched on, but more importantly, in terms of the work on in terms of innovation, culture, and governance from a provincial strategic point of view. And there are specific things that is currently underway in terms of just people, systems, processes, and tools, and that speaks to the specifics and the areas that we are targeting to ensure that we do make the shift to get to a more renewed and invigorated effort to ensure that services as rendered or delivered, and then speak ultimately to the lived reality of the citizen. So that I think should the committee require anything additional, we do have a full team here, but we can provide the committee with information in terms of each aspect of the work that we're dealing with as we're making and with renewed focus on service delivery. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. I always want to remind the members, individual departmental votes and SCOPA meetings as well on every single department, just in case. Ms. Cullen and then Mr. Venter.
Thank you, Chairperson. Honourable Chair, I saw that there was a question from Honourable Member Mackenzie, specifically around the education, 58 million. I just wanted to find out if member was answered, but just the specifics around it, it is under around uncompetitive procurement and non-compliance around procurement processes. So like insufficient quotations, deviations, not being justified, procurement processes not followed, and contract extensions. So you can see that it was to a greater extent, not necessarily the same as the previous period. Thanks, Honourable Chair.
Thank you so much, Mr. Venter.
Thank you. There's also
Mr. Venter, you're on mute.
oh, sorry. There's also an open question in the chat on the underlying documents at education, and it's a little bit more complicated than the documents were not available. So the indicator relates to pupils retained from grade 1 to grade 9. So you've got a 9-year gap between your denominator and your numerator. So there was some concerns also around if learners transferred in the middle. So let's say in grade 5, do you include them in both the numerator and the denominator, or don't you? But the real problem was the denominator. So the pupils that were there in grade 1, that data we've never audited it before. And because it's 9 years ago, the documentation wasn't available, so that then resulted in a limitation. So it's it's not a normal one where it's current year documentation that we couldn't get.
Apologies, can I just quickly understand correctly? So because it wasn't audited previously, that documentation was not necessary. Now we're using that information with the auditing, and obviously you have findings on that, but the auditing wasn't done previously and there's no documents for that time, obviously. Am I understanding correct? I just want to make sure I'm on the same WhatsApp group as everyone else.
That's correct, yes. So for the grade 1 CMIS data or the system data, we've never tested it, and that is part of calculating the percentage. So that will be the denominator. And because there's no supporting documentation, we also couldn't go back to that year to test it.
Okay, thank you so much. Members, I'm going to open up another round of questions. We still have time. Okay, if none, then I'll go with my follow-up questions then first. I wanted to find out regarding the performance auditing. At the budget workshop earlier this year, one of the questions I asked the Auditor General, I said, obviously it's wonderful that we want to do performance auditing in the Western Cape. We're really pushing for performance auditing. But my question at the time was, how much is it going to cost the AG to do the performance auditing, for example, for the Western Cape government? Okay. And the reason I asked that is because my understanding is that it doesn't help we want to do performance auditing, but then the AG doesn't have a budget in order to do the performance auditing. Ms. Cullen, you indicated that, sorry, I just want to see here quickly. You indicated that obviously you're looking at that now. You're trying to see in terms of the vision, in terms of the culture shift strategy that you're embarking on, how those type of mandates can be fulfilled and what understanding that impact and the linkage to the mandate. But is the AG going to have money, an actual budget in order to do the performance auditing? Because otherwise we can be speaking about wanting to do performance auditing for the next 5 years without anything happening. And then my second question is, Mr. Venter indicated obviously that when you have a lot of smaller amounts that you need to get back. But the problem with that is the cost of recovery in relation to recovering those smaller amounts is not feasible. So are there any policy or legislative mechanisms that we need to, or, not mechanisms, but documentation or, that we need to review so the cost of recovery would be feasible for smaller amounts where the cost of the recovery currently outweighs the amount required to recover? Because my one concern is that if we simply leave those smaller amounts, that the message that we may be sending is that we don't necessarily, are as robust in getting those smaller amounts back. Whereas from a financial aspect, I can understand that if you're going to be spending more money to get a small amount back, that it might not necessarily be in the people's interest. So if you maybe have any ideas that you would like to share with us in that regard. I see Member Mackenzie's hand. Member Mackenzie, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to say thanks for the explanation around human settlements. It gives more clarity around it. Otherwise, I was going to walk away with the wrong thinking around what happened there. But then I just want to make sure that I don't again walk around with a misunderstanding around Westgrow. So there was an action plan identified the previous year, but what the AG is saying that it wasn't implemented the second year. Is that my correct understanding? And what was the reasons for that? And based on my understanding, there was no consequences for the second lack of implementation. Is that right? Again, we'll get to the report, but let's make sure that I understand this correctly. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you so much. Ms. Cullen and then Ms. Cantana, if any questions are directed to you guys.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. So in terms of the performance auditing, I think it's important that we identify and set the scoping around the performance auditing. And I think if we look at the performance auditing principles around efficiency, effectiveness, and I guess cost effectiveness as well, we do need to understand that we've got a lot of processes which run in the auditing of, say, procurement and contract management, which gives you some level of comfort around that. But agreed, in terms of our strategy, our 2030 culture shift strategy, the intention is for us to be able to start delving into the full story and the full value chain. And if one then looks at saying that the mandate of the department is specific and that the need on the ground is identified, and in fact performance targets and indicators are set in a manner that is going to ultimately meet that need, not maybe looking and confining ourselves to just a 1-year view, but looking at it from an administration view to say what is it that's been set in the 5 years, and ultimately whether in fact that money that has been spent and expended is in fact ultimately giving you the value. And that is how we would then interpret how performance or how we've actually in fact met the need of the citizen on the ground. So I think we can have a greater conversation. When it comes to budgeting, we would need to cost it as an audit office, and we would then need to come to the Western Cape Provincial Government to say this is how much it will cost to in fact audit it from that performance auditing perspective, as well as from the lived reality of the citizen on the ground, connecting the dots when it comes to the spend and ultimately moving into the targets and indicators. I think it is a big exercise because we would need to start scoping it per department. What it really does need in terms of time, skill, and resources, and ultimately moving forward to that. So I think it is something that we have commenced a conversation with the provincial government to say where are those areas that we could potentially start increasing our view on. And you would see that we would also to some extent done so in the last cycle. We have looked at aspects like your project start to project close. But I think that's an area that we can really continue having a conversation with. And I think it will be important to for PT to also weigh in on that conversation because we've been engaging with them as well. Just to unpack a little bit in terms of the smaller amounts and getting back in terms of the smaller amounts, and the PFMA is quite clear in ensuring that the accounting officer and accounting authority safeguard the assets of the department. We draw on our understanding as to if something is seen as a potential financial loss or a likely financial loss, or it actually has occurred, that you would then be utilizing the resources of the state to then ultimately recover this. And if that resources of the state are going to be much more than what the recovery would be, you'd be able to do the analysis in terms of the feasibility. And I think I do acknowledge that you mentioned it comes from a financial aspect, but I think it is the principle ultimately that would underpin. So specifically bringing it back to home to human settlements, it was about how certain aspects of the calculation were set out that ultimately caused an overpayment to a beneficiary, and it was given to the financial institutions. Now, that aspect of the overpayment, when it comes to then determining, in fact, can someone be held responsible for this? How did it occur? How did it come into the system in terms of the processes that it followed? And when we followed that line with the accounting officer, we found that it was these clarity-making conversations and decisions that were taken with National Department, and that it wasn't just an isolated case where we could just hone it down to maybe just a specific step, or it was related to a bunch of beneficiaries in terms of that calculation. So I think from that perspective, then the feasibility test would be a good area to start with the department and maybe just get more insight from the department on that one. In terms of Westgrow, just the clarity around the steps that had been taken. So the issue was identified as a flag in the previous year, the extent of which was not as vast as was identified then in the current year. So once we completed the audit in the prior year, management prepared an action plan to address prior year audit findings. And I think the timing of the implementation of that action plan didn't allow for them to adequately address the issues by the time they got to finality in terms of the submission of the financial statements for audit purposes. What we also then found was that this prior period error that they needed to identify closely linked to determining the useful lives of the assets that they keep in their books, and that coinciding with the year-end reporting didn't get adequately reviewed. So that is specifically on the financial statement part of the auditor's report, the qualification. Now, when it comes to the actual non-compliances that are sitting in that environment, When I talk about consequence management, I'm talking specifically around the irregular expenditure. And we know that the PFME is clear that when irregular expenditure is identified, it is the responsibility of the accounting officer or the accounting authority to then ultimately investigate and then take the necessary consequence management around that. And the message that we bring in today is to say that we found in instances that consequence management is not taking place. I could attempt to delve a little bit into the root causes that allowed that to occur. And what we picked up was there was a level of instability at leadership level during the financial year that affected various levels of oversight that was displayed. And then the action to address the irregular expenditure that was identified in accordance with the legislation was not yet implemented by the time we got to year end. So I think it is definitely an area that can be unpacked further with the entity. I hope that does clarify, Honourable Chairperson.
Thank you so much. Ms. Quintana, is there anything you would like to add?
Chair, I see Member Mackenzie is happy with the response, but maybe just to elaborate a little more and agree with the Ms. Callan's and HSA's observations in terms of Wesgro, and that is for us in terms of our assessment was the instability at leadership level. There were quite a number of changes that affected the workings of the entity, and obviously it would be better to have the conversation with the entity itself. But from a support function, we have been engaging the entity, and in this instance, currently what we refer to as the parent department. The Department of Economic Development has also done some work in terms of just adding and providing the additional support. There is a new CEO, and there is now currently an acting CFO also in taking care of business. I'm just going to ask Mr. Hadin, because he has been actively in the space, and for additional updates on that. Aziz?
Thank you, Jalinda. And this will be made apparent in the session with Wesgro. So when the audit outcome of Wesgro was delivered, the Provincial Treasury had a meeting with the CFO as well as the CEO to understand what exactly went wrong in the current year Wesgro audit. And just to address Member Mvimbi's question earlier, as Ms. Cullen had indicated that Wesgro, the qualification within Wesgro did not attract any significant losses to the entity. It was a technical adjustment that was made on their financial statement, specifically relating to property, plant and equipment. It's not that any of the PPE was missing. It was just that the entity had not adjusted it to say for how long the entity was going to be able to continue using the assets. So it's not a case of anything having gone missing for somebody to be taken to account. In terms of the plan that Wesgro already has implemented, the Provincial Treasury has evaluated the plan, and we are comforted by the fact that the corrective actions that the Wesgro has implemented or is in the process of implementing, having been vetted by the Provincial Treasury, it will address the shortcomings that had been identified in the current audit. So for now, Wesgro is, we have bilateral meetings with the entity to ensure that whatever audit action plan emanating from the audit has been put forward, it has been vetted by the Provincial Treasury, and that we will monitor it on a quarterly basis and give assistance to the entity to both address the accounting issues as well as the supply chain issues that had been identified. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, are there any urgent follow-up questions? Okay, I see no hands. Ms. Cullen, then I just have one last question. You indicated obviously in terms of how money would be giving value, we would need to cost it in terms of performance management, and you would then come to us and say, this is how much it would cost. You would need to scope per department. So as a budget committee, if we said, for example, we will give you 1 year because we want an exercise to understand how much it will cost, would 1 year be enough for the AG in the Western Cape to scope the department so that next year when we have the same statutory meeting as we do today, you would then be able to at least tell us how much it would cost to implement performance management for the Western Cape, as in an actual number in rand terms? Would something like that be possible? Is a year enough? What would the ability be to do that? Because my concern is that every single year we're going to be asking you this question, and every single year we haven't started performance management yet, and the scoping hasn't started yet. So in order to move forward, if the scoping needs to happen, how much time would be required in order to do that? Thanks.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, for that question. It's going to be dependent on the expectation. I think it's going to be quite important for us to identify and define what the expectation is, because performance auditing can be implemented, but we need to understand to what extent it would need to be implemented. So are we looking at end-to-end processes? Are we looking at specific projects? Are we looking at specific system processes, say asset management, perhaps expenditure management, because performance auditing in itself could be a very extensive, let me put it that way, very extensive and very penetrative in terms of the environment. So we need to understand what the exact expectation is per department. That exercise would require us then to engage each and every department. And I think it needs to be quite robust and quite clear as to what the expectation is. Secondly, from there, we would then obviously need to look at the skills and experience that is required for that. And I think I say that in line with also understanding the fact that we've got a combined assurance environment where you do have other assurance providers in the environment. And if we reflect on the levels of assurance one gets, you'd probably get your first level of assurance from management, your second level of assurance from your governance, compliance, and your internal audit divisions, and your third level of assurance would then ultimately come from your external auditors. So I think that provincial department will, Western Cape provincial government will have to do an exercise as to where the assurance has already been gained within a specific area, where it can be planned for and built in terms of the processes, say even for your internal audit space, and then ultimately where you would want external audit to also be involved in. Again, we must understand the risk that we are trying to mitigate. And I understand holistically, we could say if it comes from a performance audit perspective, we want to understand whether the money that is spent is spent efficiently and effectively and is meeting the principles of performance ultimately. But we must be very clear as to where that stands. And I think post that, then the costing thereof can come through from our side. I must be honest, Honourable Chair, I wouldn't want to necessarily say that one can commit to a year to do this because it is pretty much a very big scoping exercise. But I think we could perhaps maybe with ourselves and as well as PT put our heads together to say, perhaps come to you with a proposal to say this could be the high level roadmap, maybe journey map that we could embark on so that we don't exclude every role player and assurance role player in the environment. I hope that's fine, Honourable Chair.
Thank you. The only reason I used the 1 year was because I just wanted to understand what the time period would be. Ms. Cantana, would Provincial Treasury be able to sit with the AG and try to put your heads together in order to come up with a possible proposal in this regard? Obviously, it doesn't need to be 1 year if the expertise and skills and budget required would not be feasible within a 1 year timeline. But we can't continue speaking about performance auditing and budget committee every single year, but we'd have no plan between how the AG is going to go about this. We need to now start making decisions on this.
Yeah, thanks for that. The Provincial Treasury, together with the Department of the Premier, is engaging the AG on a regular basis, and we can certainly put our heads together in starting. I think we do have a scheduled meeting as soon as this week. towards the end of this week, so we can start putting our heads together and see what is doable within the space and how to get there.
So it's October at the moment. We're obviously going into budget season up until the first week or so of December. So at the budget committee meeting in the first quarter next year, which will essentially be your fourth quarter financially, would we be able to get some feedback on what the idea is in order to go forward on this?
I think, Chair, we will certainly be able to put something on the table in terms of the discussions between ourselves and the AG around this particular matter by then.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I think we can then invite the AG as well to that meeting so that we can all be in the same WhatsApp group. Colleagues, any last minute urgent follow-up questions? If none, then I just would like to thank both the AG in the Western Cape as well as Provincial Treasury for their presentation and engagement with us today. I always find finance fun, but not everyone does. So as you would know, I'm on a mission to make finance fun again. And I think that Ms. Cullen, you're the new business unit leader. We look forward to working with you, especially in this budget season. And I wish you all the best in your new role. With that, colleagues, the officials from the department, if you need to go about your day-to-day business, you're welcome to do so. You may leave the meeting. The committee members will now simply be dealing with their committee administration. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Thank you, members.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Members, what we'll do now is we're just quickly going to go through our documentation for the draft.
Chiles, it's just
that is the minutes for 20 September. Members, if you can just have a look for your attendance. Okay, that's page 1. Page 2, that was the presentation of the payroll and first quarter performance. Okay, page 3 is just signature-wise. If I could get a mover for the minutes, please. Thank you, members McKenzie and Fry. Minutes are so adopted then. If we can put up the quarterly report.
Is that big enough, Chair?
Yes, thank you so much. So that's our quarterly report for April and June, just with our activities. Okay, that's page 1. Page 2, that was the DORA in the beginning of the year, if I remember correctly. Yes. Can go further. Yes, that was our own money bills. Can you just stop there for members so they can just check the items? Okay, can go down. Okay, that was DORA again. Can go down. Okay, and there's the rest of the budget for the committee that was in the previous quarter. Okay, and that's just the respective annexures.
Yeah.
Okay, we can go down. We also received this document. Can we just stop there so members can just note the different things that are still outstanding? Please go back up to the first one. Let's just, okay. So those have been distributed. Can go down. Okay, that was noted. Just quickly, you're going too fast, sorry.
Okay, sorry, Chair.
The one in red, we said we're going to reschedule because the commissioner was sick at the time, so it's fine. Okay, the rest is noted. Can go down. Okay, distributed. Okay. I think that PBO1, they've already submitted to us.
Okay.
If I remember correctly. They actually sent the annual reports for us instead of the expenditure which we asked for, so that is completed. Okay, Okay, that's fine. All of that has been distributed. Okay, let's go down. Okay, that gone down. We did direct that. We also did direct that SAMS to the Committee on Education, and they did actually have that briefing earlier this year. Okay, the rest is distributed. Let's see here quickly. I just want to check quickly that SASSA sent us the information.
No, Chair. We're still waiting. I did send them a follow-up.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Can go down. And we did say we're going to reschedule with Gauteng because they weren't able to join us in the previous workshop. So we still need to just look for dates for that. Let's go down.
Chair, the GPL will be here. There is a committee that is visiting. So
yeah, it's not the budget committee. So it doesn't help you ask other committees on money bills processes.
We can always grab them on the side.
Thank you. Okay, the FFC staff, they are already engaged with us on all of that.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay, cool. Members, if I could have a mover for the quarterly report.
I move, Chair.
Thank you, Member Mare. If I could have a seconder for the quarterly report.
Second.
Thank you, Member Mackenzie. The quarterly report is so adopted. Okay, let me just open my email quickly. I have one feedback from the legal unit for us all. Let me just open this up. Okay, so Mr. Advocate Leroux just indicated that he's requesting that they just get some more time with the first draft of the bill. So this is now the legislative side, not the rule side. Because we indicated in our timeline 10 October, and they are asking if they could get until the 21st, the 20th or 21st of October to submit the first draft of the bill, because at the moment our workshop is scheduled for the 24th. Now, the reason we scheduled the workshop in the meantime for the 24th was with the aim of giving members 2 weeks between the 10th of October, when we were supposed to get the first draft of the bill, and the 24th for the respective political parties and their representatives to go through all of the information, because we felt that the volume of information you would need at least about 2 weeks to deal with that. So now my request today, since the legal unit is asking to submit their first draft of the bill on the 21st, if we could then, with the same principle, give ourselves 2 weeks to go through the documentation, because I don't think it would be fair for members to have 3 days to go through everything, especially since at the workshop we're also going to be asking the National Treasury, Provincial Treasury, and the FFC to also give their inputs on the rules, the first draft of the rules and the first draft of the bill, just so that I do feel members would require enough time for that. Member Mackenzie?
No, Chair, you've actually answered my question.
Okay, so members, are you okay that with the request from legal, that with the same principle from the 21st of October, we more or less give them 2 weeks before we have the workshop, because then we'll go look for a new date for the workshop in this regard, because I don't want legal to then come to the workshop and say, we have not concluded the work we've asked you to, but now we're also asking people to give feedback on that same work, as it would be unfair towards the budget committee members to do that type of work within 3 working days.
I agree.
Okay. I hear no other objections or anything, so I'm assuming that's in order then. Okay, Ms. Kamish Ahmed, myself and yourself will then go look for new dates to request from programming. I must, however, caution that we are in a very strenuous annual report budgetary season. So we will do our best to look for a date this year. But yeah, I'm not going to make any promises right now, but let's go look for a date, and I'll give feedback at the next budget meeting. Thank you. So all via programming. Thank you so much. Ms. Kamish Ahmed, you had your hand up. Is there something I missed?
No, sorry, Chair. It was just my reaction. I was clapping and then I had my hand up and then I actually went to have a finger.
No problem. No problem. Are there any other resolutions or actions from members? I would like to ask that as a resolution that we just put it down to say that we would like Provincial Treasury and the AG in the first meeting of next year. So I think it would probably be February or March of our first budget committee meeting, just to come give us feedback on the process that would be followed towards implementing performance auditing within the province and the costing for it. Would members be okay with that? Okay, yeah, no objections, so that seems fine then. Are there any other resolutions or actions from members? If none, thank you so much and for your robust engagement today. I hope you have a wonderful, fun-filled finance annual report season. I wish you happy reading and I hope you have a safe and wonderful week. Thank you. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Chairperson.